Funding for the Gone Fishin' Nuclear Report is provided by the Energy Communities Alliance.
Welcome to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report, your one-stop source for all the latest news from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Program. Now, here's your host, Michael Butler.
Hello and welcome to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report. Today is Monday, July 29th, 2024. We're covering all the news from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Program across the country. And we thank our friends at the Energy Communities Alliance for being presenting sponsor for today's episode. ECA, local concerns, national impact. If you haven't subscribed to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report, we invite you to do that now. As the nation begins to experience a renaissance in nuclear energy as a source of electricity, one nagging issue continues to raise its head in public discussions. What are we going to do with the waste? When people talk about waste in connection with nuclear power plants, they usually mean the spent or used fuel from reactor operations. Spent fuel is not really waste. It is a valuable energy resource. Through reprocessing, fissionable material can be captured from used fuel and fabricated into new fuel, greatly extending the life of available uranium reserves and powering reactors for electricity far into the future. But we don't have reprocessing in this country right now. Instead, the spent fuel is being stored at the individual reactor sites where it was generated, waiting for the day when it can possibly be reused or be sent to a permanent repository for ultimate disposal. There are 35 sites in the United States where spent fuel is being stored today. The Department of Energy was obligated by law to take possession of the fuel starting in 1998, over 25 years ago. That hasn't happened. This failure has created millions of dollars in liability for the federal government, as DOE is forced to reimburse utilities for the funds they paid for years into an account meant to assure storage and disposal of spent nuclear fuel. Now there's a move afoot to identify a place or places in the country where a consolidated interim storage facility could be located, and all the spent fuel now stranded at the various nuclear plant sites could be brought into one place. This would reduce security requirements, relieve federal financial liability, and could benefit a willing host community with economic incentives that could create jobs, generate revenue, and change lives for the better in the chosen community. Recently, the Gone Fission Nuclear Report went to the nation's capital, where our presenting sponsor, the Energy Communities Alliance, convened Department of Energy representatives, community leaders, elected officials, and economic developers from around the country to talk about this issue. Kara Colton, ECA's Director of Nuclear Policy, explained the purpose of the meeting in this interview. We're talking now with Kara Colton. Kara is the Director of Nuclear Policy for the Energy Communities Alliance in Washington, and has been the sort of host and coordinator of this week's meeting. Kara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. Tell us first, what is the purpose of this meeting this week? Why did you convene these people?
The purpose of the meeting this week is to get all of the different parties in the room and work towards alignment around what we want to help ensure that the government can fulfill its responsibility to manage and dispose of nuclear waste. Our communities, the Energy Communities Alliance, are the hosts of high-level waste, legacy high-level waste from the government's weapons program and research and development. And we need a place for that to go. The government was supposed to take that waste in 1998, and they haven't. And we don't really have a lot of progress to show for a conversation that's been happening for over 40 years. And we now have a new program supported by Congress for a consent-based siting process. And we want to be part of that discussion. And it will impact our communities, not only in terms of getting the waste safely managed and out of their communities, but also because many of these communities are really interested in new nuclear development. And unless we really can demonstrate that the United States is able to manage all of these nuclear projects from the front end all the way through the back end, we may not be able to realize the myriad benefits that nuclear presents.
So when you talk about consent-based siting, it sounds like you're looking for interested and willing communities who would see the benefit of hosting a spent fuel storage facility.
Yep, we are looking to help the government right now, who is not looking for a specific site, but we're trying to get the communities that understand some of the nuclear history, have a skilled workforce in their communities, and have them talk to other communities that maybe don't have that experience with nuclear, and ensure that the local perspective is really being considered along with the state perspective, the tribal perspective, the federal perspective. We want to make sure that everybody starts to work towards that alignment.
There are about 35 sites in the country that have spent fuel from nuclear power plant operations. Some of those plants have been shut down and some are still operating. Why is it important to consolidate that spent fuel that's at these scattered sites around the country? Why is it important to consolidate that in one location?
I mean, I think there are many reasons why people would want to do that. If the plant is no longer functioning and there's just a spent fuel storage site there, that means that's land that's not being used for economic benefit and for the goodness and the well-being of that community. So it's an opportunity to reuse that land for something else and rather than just having it waste sit on that land. Now, I do want to say that it's safe in the way that it's stored, but if we centralize it, then we know exactly where it is. We're paying less for guards and guns, and we're giving economic opportunities back to these communities that have those facilities there.
Let's talk about who came to this meeting. These folks were kind of from all over the country. Can you give us a feel for who they are, what types of people, and where they came from?
Absolutely. So ECA, we work with the local elected officials and economic development leaders in the communities across the country, and that's DOE's nuclear weapons complex. And that's South Carolina, Idaho, Washington State was here, people from New Mexico. We had folks from Colorado. We also had, at the state legislator level, we had folks from Alaska, from Kentucky, and we had tribal representation as well, which is fantastic because all of these groups are going to have to get to consent, whatever consent ultimately looks like or is defined to be. And it's probably going to be unique to the communities that are looking at these kinds of projects, how they consent. The state will also need to have that idea. And by having everybody that from this very wide geographic representation and these different levels of government and decision making, it just means that we can more comprehensively look at things and ensure that everybody who's impacted gets a voice in what we're trying to get done.
What are the potential benefits for a community that is considering hosting a spent fuel storage facility? What could they expect to get out of it?
They can get jobs. There'd be construction. There would be related services related to things that are perhaps cask building, economic opportunities that could be related to the nuclear industry, even if it's on the back end being in their community. Mm-hmm. There are also opportunities perhaps for co-location. We hear a lot on the Hill these days about reprocessing and recycling. And so this could be not a waste product, but rather something that can be used to produce energy in the future. Mm-hmm. There are also opportunities in terms of being a host community for you, anyone, to say, we would be willing to host perhaps a waste facility, but we'd really also like to host something with it. Mm-hmm. And create a hub kind of mm-hmm. environment where there's a lot of other activities, whether they're just energy related or whether they're opportunities to bring in AI and data centers. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of folks looking at nuclear nowadays that haven't perhaps been looking at it up until now. And I think that once we demonstrate and can demonstrate that we can socially and politically site one of these waste facilities, we know that we can do it technically. Mm-hmm. We know that it's safe, mm-hmm. but it really does open the door to future nuclear deployment.
So it looks like hosting a spent fuel storage facility maybe could be the beginning of an economic development package of some kind that would be built around either the nuclear industry or some of the related things, technology that could be attracted as part of that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
All right. What are the next steps? You're having this meeting, and the folks have been here and talked about this. What are your next steps from ECA standpoint in terms of furthering this discussion?
Sure. Well, ECA is going to have another meeting with wide participation, multiple viewpoints like we did today. Hopefully we're getting bigger and bigger with each one of these meetings as more people choose to be part of the conversation. And then we'll also be giving out grants to communities that can apply. You don't have to be an ECA member, and you can explore nuclear related issues with this grant money that we're going to be offering to communities.
If there's someone out there now, a community leader listening or watching this who might be interested in knowing more about these grants, what should they do? How do they contact ECA or contact you?
They can contact me. They can go to the ECA website. We'll be posting that the application process is open. Mm-hmm. It should be by the end of the summer. And our website is www.energyca.org.
Energyca.org.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. How important do you think these kind of conversations are in moving the ball down the road here? What when we get together and talk about it, what value is there in that from your standpoint?
The value of these conversations is getting people understanding all of the viewpoints that exist around nuclear. You're going to have people that know a lot. You're going to have people that only know what they've seen on television. And by bringing everybody together and understanding where the different priorities are, where the different concerns lie, it means that we're going to be better at planning for the future. For new nuclear deployment, we're going to have a better idea of how to get alignment. I mean, I've used that word a lot today, but it really is the need to align all of the decision makers and all of the impacted parties so that we create something that works. We've been on this conversation for a long time. It hasn't worked. And that's because we look at the examples, there was an alignment. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be a lot of these conversations. It's going to be iterative because we have to keep at it. This is a multi-generational project. It takes a long time to license these kinds of projects. It takes a long time to ensure that you've got the financing that you need in place. And it needs to be part of the discussion that it takes a long time to build public support. And so we are just going to keep going at it so that we can build that support to see these things happen.
Well, Kara Colton, Director of Nuclear Policy for the Energy Communities Alliance, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Here's a look at nuclear power by the numbers. There are 94 operating reactors in the United States, located at 23 sites. Nuclear produces 18% of the nation's total electricity. It is the second largest producer next to natural gas. Nuclear plants operate with 99% reliability, and the industry as a whole produces over 475,000 new jobs. The Department of Energy has established an Office of Consent-Based Siting to work with communities that may have an interest in exploring hosting an interim spent fuel storage facility. We talked with Marla Morales, currently serving as acting director of that DOE organization. You'll notice in the interview that Marla draws a sharp distinction between the interim storage solution she is seeking and the permanent repository, which was established by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982. We're talking with Marla Morales. Marla is the acting director of the Office of Consent-Based Siting for the Department of Energy. And Marla, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you here. Let's start with a basic definition, if we can. What is consent-based siting? When you talk about that, what are we talking about?
So the process of consent-based siting is to prioritize the community's perspectives and interests and desires as they go forward in siting any facility. So it gives communities a chance for more fulsome engagement, more opportunities to be part of the process of actually siting any facility at any location.
And why is it important that we have a spent nuclear fuel repository? The fuel now is stored at nuclear plant sites around the country. I think there are about 35 sites, maybe something like that. Why can't they just stay where they are? What's the reason for needing a repository?
Okay, so I will say that my office is in charge of consent-based siting for federal interim storage facility rather than a repository. Okay. So just as a small clarification there.
Good.
And then first and foremost, it is safe. Where it's currently being stored is safe. It has been determined safe by NRC. DOE follows that going forward. But the other side of that is the communities never agreed to host that fuel. So all of those sites at 30 to 35 locations around the continental United States, they never said, please leave this here indefinitely. They were voluntold that. And so the federal government has been mandated, in my office specifically, to engage the communities to find a community that's a willing host through the consent-based siting process. So as I said, it is safe to be stored there, and going forward, it reduces DOE's liabilities. If DOE can move that fuel out of those decommissioned sites or away from nuclear power reactors, that opens up that land for other uses going forward. So you can actually clear land, re-release to the community can use that land for something else going forward.
So originally, when the plants were built, the utilities that built them had the expectation that the spent fuel would be moved off-site and put into some kind of a storage facility, which really never came about, right?
Correct. And to date, DOE has about $10 billion in liability, and that's projected to be upwards between 30 and 40 moving forward, $1 billion. Mm-hmm. So it is in DOE's best interest to reduce those liabilities and kind of take title of the fuel and move it its own.
Where does that liability come from? What's the basis for it?
So utilities put money into a fund. And then over time, when the utilities sued the federal government for not taking title of the fuel, DOE then had to develop a judgment fund, and then they pull money out of that judgment fund that goes into paying for the. Let me try that again. That judgment fund goes to reimbursing the utilities for the storage of the fuel.
That's that they've already paid.
That they've already paid for.
Okay.
So they're actually made whole essentially. But for the most part, right now, we're asking for volunteers. That's the most important part of this process, is that the communities get a chance to say, I want to learn more about this, and I want to hear more about this and be part of the process going forward. So it's completely voluntary. And we'll hopefully in fall of 2025 release a call for volunteers or an expression of interest in which communities get a chance to say that they could potentially one day see themselves as willing hosts.
Why would a community volunteer, in your opinion? What's the benefit to a community for hosting a facility like this?
There's a number of benefits, other than being part of the national story and kind of raising that national good for the country. There's also financial benefits as well. So wherever facility ends up being housed, there are going to be other industries that come along with it. So there's a real possibility that communities could be rejuvenated. If a community is economically on decline or something like that, there's millions and billions of dollars that would come along with hosting this facility in terms of jobs, education, and the communities get a chance to actually decide what they want. Do they want a research and development center?
or do they want a hospital? Do they want schools and universities, or do they want a training center for trades? Having a consent-based siting process means that communities get to be part of that and help us figure out how to best get them what they want. I wouldn't say in exchange, but in part of hosting a facility going forward.
Okay, so there are ancillary benefits that would come along with the facility that could improve a community's economy and standard of living.
Correct.
Okay. Now, we talk mostly about commercial spent fuel in this process and the fuel that's sort of stranded or stored at the nuclear plant sites around the country, but it also looks at the high-level defense waste. Is that right?
So what we are currently looking at is just commercial spent nuclear fuel.
Okay.
So we've been mandated to essentially remove the stranded fuel. So from those 15,000 metric tons of fuel that is currently at decommissioned sites, that's what we have been mandated to look for. Later down the line, defense waste is part of that story, but it's not currently what we're looking at.
Okay, so it's not part of your priority or
The priority is to move fuel that is currently stored at the 35 sites, the decommissioned or shut down sites. That's the priority, to reopen that land up.
Okay. What do you think it will take to get a community interested in hosting a site, a storage facility? What kind of things would you look at? You mentioned some of the ancillary benefits earlier, but is there a list of things that you know about that a community is going to want to see or have happen in order to host a storage site?
So in addition to what we already talked about, I would say the primary thing I think communities are interested in is being part of the process. I think that for the most part, they want to know that that DOE is being transparent with the information they're giving out, that they're not going to be blindsided in any way. And so that's actually what I think is going to be the most important part, taking them along for this process. In addition to the ancillary things we talked about, in addition to those other benefits and socioeconomic benefits, I think for the most part, in order to get a community on board, let's have open communication, transparent communication, so that we're all in this together.
It's been pointed out in this meeting this week that the dialogue is somewhat generational, that for older people, the connection between nuclear power and the atomic bomb is very real and something that they think about. Whereas younger people see nuclear as more of a source of clean energy and don't have the same kind of, if you want to call it, baggage with the weapons program. Can you comment on that?
I completely think that is correct. That is a very apt discovery. If I asked my mom what she thought about nuclear weapons, she would say atomic bombs. If I asked my younger cousins, they would say, well, if they knew about it, they would say carbon-free and clean energy. I think that's what we're trying to navigate. We're trying to figure out how to message that it is safe in the form that it's in. It is currently safe where it's being stored. Nuclear is the path to carbon-free energy. So if we can address the storage problem and the back end of the fuel cycle, we can really open up the front end of the fuel cycle for advanced reactors and SMRs and microreactors, which is that energy need that the United States government needs right now, or the United States needs right now.
How important do you think meetings like this one are in terms of furthering the discussion and moving toward a solution to this issue?
I think meetings like this are very important, in part because in order for a consent-based siting process to be successful, it has to be adaptive. It has to be able to move with whatever the community needs and new perspectives. And meetings like this allow us to do that. We get to hear what's going on. We get to hear the different perspectives from different agencies, different groups across the country. So the concerns in Kentucky are not the same concerns as Idaho has. The concerns of Virginia aren't the same concerns that New Mexico has. And workshops like this allow us to hear that and take that feedback and incorporate it into our process going forward.
We have a lot of community leaders who listen and watch this podcast around the country at DOE sites and other places. What would be your message to those folks today if they're watching this podcast in terms of whether they should consider hosting a storage facility?
I would say that they are welcome to reach out to the Office of Consent-Based Siting, first of all. We do have a website that has a lot of information on what spent nuclear fuel is and what we're actually looking for at this point. And again, right now we're just doing capacity building. But come fall of 2025, we're going to have that national call for expressions of interest. And at that point, think about whether or not you just want to hear a little bit more about it. That's our initial ask. Initial ask is be open to the possibility, and then let's go down that road together.
And the address of the website is consent-based siting.
I read it off my card.
.com. Oh, you've got it on your card.
I do. It is energy.gov/consent-based siting, all one word.
Okay. Energy.gov/consent-based siting. Okay.
Yes.
Marla, thank you very much for being with us on the podcast today, and I wish you a lot of luck in finding a suitable community to host the storage facility.
Thank you for having me.
As a result of DOE's consent-based siting initiative, local community leaders are starting to consider their level of interest in hosting an interim storage facility. Here's Idaho Falls Mayor Rebecca Casper.
Idaho is poised to consider something like this. We could certainly sponsor, host a site, I think, very easily in terms of the logistics, location, and even transportation networks. Right, they're there, and so because of that, I think we have a responsibility as officials within the state to make sure that we thoroughly discuss it before we fail or before we choose not to step up or choose to step up. But we have to have that conversation because it's too big of an opportunity, potentially. It probably behooves us to start with the end in mind and work backwards. And if it's an interim facility, then truly we want to make sure it's designed to be such and that whatever goes in could come out easily. And so, and I know, many others have considered all of these things before, but the value, I guess, that I and some of the folks that are here from Idaho would bring is that we're translating what the experts have thought about for years and contemplated and planned for, and trying to translate that into what local citizens and local actors might need to know and understand about these processes. If your site can meet all of the criteria seismically and hydrologically and all the other things that might be needed, then you need to go and ask yourself, what are some of the needs that your state or that area has that could be perhaps met so that there is some incentive to want to pursue this and want to take on the responsibility and the traffic or whatever, or some of the risk. And for Idaho, that would be maybe we have concerns about. We're a rural state that has a largely agricultural base that produces income for the state. We have some high tech going on, but we also have a lot of federal land, and so it falls then upon the taxpayers from the non-federal land areas, right, to pay for the entire state's worth of infrastructure. That's hard to do with just taxes, and so Idaho might want to consider how can we develop infrastructure. That's just one thought. We also have a tax burden. Maybe we can alleviate or create a trust fund that could alleviate tax burden going forward in some way or some proportion of it in some way. So there are some creative things that we or any other locality that's considering this might want to take into consideration. That involves a lot of creativity. But I wanted to say one other thing, and that is that viewing this as merely a transaction maybe misses something that might be important, and that is that maybe there's an element of being part of the solution, right? That's not necessarily dollars or give me a facility or give me a this or that, but it's the psychic reward that comes from being part of the solution, to having some responsibility as citizens and taxpayers. In Idaho, we benefit a great deal from Idaho National Laboratory. It puts us on the map. It brings some of the most amazing people to our community and to our state. And in return, maybe we pay something back in the sense that we step up. Now, some people would say, we already step up. But I hope that your viewers and listeners will know what I mean. And then I think viewing it as a transaction is a limited kind of view. This is also creating opportunity for more expertise and resources to come into a community. So there's some value in this all the way around.
This podcast is focused on the cleanup program being carried out by DOE's Office of Environmental Management. How does the consent-based siting initiative affect the EM cleanup program? Here's DOE EM official Kristen Ellis.
Sure, and I don't think the conversation is only about the commercial here, but it is important to understand the distinctions between the two. Going back to our original mission of cleaning up the environmental legacy from the Manhattan Project and the other Cold War era cleanup, part of that activities resulted in high-level waste that needs a permanent geologic repository. So we do have some defense waste, is how we refer to it, because it was government generated. And so when the original conversation started about Yucca Mountain, we had sets of waste that would be going to Yucca Mountain in those original conversations, along with the spent nuclear fuel from the commercial plants that ECA and others have been talking about today. Yeah, and then, part of the conversation this morning was also about the potential for recycling. And again, that's a topic that's been looked at on and off over the years. So I think from the perspective of the environmental management program, we're always open to continued conversations with communities and states and tribal governments and other partners who may find new and innovative ways to approach these issues. And yeah, we talked a little bit this morning about how ECA is a good source of institutional knowledge because they as an organization have been around for more than 30 years and they represent the interests of all of the, well, not all of, but several of the local communities that are either adjacent to or immediately impacted by our site activities. Again, having the support of local communities is instrumental for our being able to be successful in our progress and our cleanup. And I think what you've seen from the group in the room here is a group of local officials who are willing to dig in and get educated on, what it is we're doing and maybe what we're not doing that people may have said that we are. And ECA has been really a great partner over the decades in finding some of those innovative solutions and new ways to think about these issues. You may be aware that ECA received funding from the Office of Nuclear Energy to be part of the consortia to discuss consent-based siting. And so, they'll continue to be part of the conversation from the nuclear energy side. And I think some of the lessons learned from that activity will help us in our ongoing conversations about EM cleanup.
Although it's highly unusual, there's at least one community that finds itself storing both commercial spent fuel from a power reactor and high-level defense waste from the weapons production program. Here's David Replog from Washington State.
Yeah, well, in the Tri-City area, we have both the nation's largest volume of defense high-level waste that's at the Hanford site that was generated from the many decades of plutonium production, both during the Manhattan Project and through the Cold War. So we have that largest volume of defense high-level waste, and then we also have used nuclear fuel from 40-plus years of commercial nuclear energy generation at Energy Northwest's Columbia Generating Station. As a community, we're really excited about the potential for new nuclear energy generation in the Tri-Cities. Energy Northwest is working on and developing a new advanced reactor, likely using X-Energy's technologies. And so we oftentimes have folks out for tours to help them better understand kind of the new nuclear development efforts. And one of the stops we make every time is at the interim storage facility at Energy Northwest for their used fuel, just to show that the used fuel there is being stored in a very safe and robust fashion, that there's no direct concerns to human health or public health or the environment. And so from the community's perspective, I don't think that there's a significant concern about the way that the used fuel is being stored, recognizing though that we do need a long-term solution, as we look far into the future. We also are very acutely aware that we have the nation's largest volume of defense high-level waste that's still in the tanks out at the Hanford site right now. It's going to be probably another decade or more before any of that waste begins being vitrified. But ultimately, we do feel like it's really important that we have a long-term destination for that for both the high-level waste from the defense mission as well as the used nuclear fuel. And we might be the only community in the country that has both right in our own backyard. So these conversations that we're having right now are really important. We do encourage the Department of Energy to really look at both the defense high-level waste as well as the used commercial used fuel as they're looking at interim storage facilities. And we recognize too that a lot of this is going to require congressional action, and so whether it's going back to take a fresh look at Yucca Mountain or interim facilities or some different location, including both of those as part of the conversation, we think is going to be pretty important.
What kind of benefits can a community expect from hosting a consolidated interim storage facility? We talked with Robbie Bennett, President and CEO of the SRS Community Reuse Organization, and Rick McLeod, President of Atomic Advice. Take a look.
For me, when a community is looking at a spent nuclear fuel facility like what we're talking about in the meeting today, it's one that the community needs to be thinking about. What type of industry does this build? Can it continue to grow the nuclear industry in your area? Can it help foster supply chain opportunities, new investment coming in beyond just the multiple billions in capital investment from a facility? What type of additional investment comes in? Things like reprocessing facilities, other technologies, R&D type opportunities. The opportunities are essentially limitless. It's just a matter of what type of location can DOE find. If it's an existing facility, how much land can they make available to create a campus and to create an opportunity for a community to see both the public investment and the private investment take place. We've spent 40 years not really highlighting the value proposition of nuclear as a clean energy. Now people are recognizing that, but we still have to get people to understand that we're not talking about nuclear waste, we're talking about spent nuclear fuel that still has life and opportunity. And that is something that, because of the changes in technology, didn't necessarily exist 40 years ago. Today it does. Having access to that and being able to use that long term, I think, is a great opportunity, but it's going to take education of both your residents, your community stakeholders, and your politicians. Really getting people to understand that this is far more than just storing waste. This is storing future opportunity. I think these meetings need to go into the communities. We're hoping to be able to do that on our side, but I think these meetings are a great basis to get Department of Energy out into communities to understand and help them understand each other, because understanding the different communities that may have an interest in these type of projects, and not every community will, but the ones who do, what's the driver for them? What are the key intangibles that they need to be looking at that matter? And I think the more we have these type of conversations, the more people get thinking about that opportunity, and that's going to be critical to long-term success.
Well, you know, this topic has been around for quite a while, but it's good it's coming back up. I think we have to work, you know, it's an iterative process. It takes steps to get there, and this meeting was one of those steps to move it forward. This may be later on in the process, but I think communities need to start thinking about their structure of going, if they're interested in hosting one of these facilities. And when I say communities, that could be regionals, multi-states, individual states. But how do you have a structure that actually goes after this? Who goes after it? Economic development groups, Chamber of Commerce. Who's actually going to pursue this? Is it going to be county governments, city governments? They need to start thinking about a structure to pursue this. And in addition, they need to start thinking about who's going to operate it. So if you have an entity that actually pursues this, what entity is actually going to operate the facility? And where is that facility going to be located? Some of the problems we've heard this week, one governor could support it and gets voted out, and another governor comes in and not support it. So it's a large issue that has to cover is what happens at the state level. But what also happens if you have a regional approach? What if it's a multi-state entity that decides to come together. You know, we kind of have that in our low-level waste compacts. There are regional compacts that accept low-level nuclear waste from, you know, booties and gowns from hospitals. That's done at a regional level, and multiple states have come together to develop these compacts. Is that a model that could be used for the spent nuclear fuel? That's another aspect that needs to be looked at. And I think Congress, like I said, this is we're losing a lot of institutional knowledge that understand the history, current processes, current issues. I don't know if our congressional staffers understand the issue as well as they need to. And we may need to start educating at least on the staffer level that can then float that up to the congressional level. It's an easily solvable problem. It's not a technical issue. It's more of a political, social issue. I have hope in that, seeing what's done at the other international levels, the other countries are doing. They're moving ahead with actual full-blown geologic repositories. So if they can do it, why can't we crack this just small interim storage issue? Not small, but an interim storage issue if they're tackling larger actual repository issues. So I have hope with them. Well, it's not new. It exists today, right? I mean, you've got interim storage sitting at commercial nuclear power plants, both operating and some that are no longer operating. So it's just consolidating those into one location as opposed to having multiple locations of spent nuclear fuel. But it's not new. It's not like we're inventing this new waste. It's already here.
Consideration of this issue and its impacts goes beyond states and local communities. It extends to the nation's Indian tribes. Here's Richard Arnold speaking for the tribes.
Actually, I work with multiple tribes in Nevada, and actually in Nevada, California, Utah, and Arizona that have ties to the various locations of federal lands. And one of the things on consent-based siting, it's very important that there be a tribal voice in anything that happens on federal lands. Tribal people have a say in any place, typically in the United States. Today is at one time was on tribal lands and are within the homelands of tribal people. So we want to make sure that there's not only an opportunity to share our thoughts, but most importantly, that to reinforce the trust responsibility between the federal governments and the tribes to make sure that there's conversations going on any kind of federal interactions or activities that are going on that might impact areas or resources that are important to tribes, and moreover affecting tribal governments and communities. Could be from tribal enterprises to resources to other types of things through treaties or executive orders or whatever they have as far as the responsibilities to interface with the federal government. So tribes have to be at the table, and oftentimes in the past we're not, and so that we're trying to change that paradigm at this point. A lot of the groups that we work with, and I'm part of the Nuclear Energy Tribal Working Group, and there's also the Tribal Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee that we work with as well. And so while those are committees and working groups, they're not designed to speak on behalf of the tribes. You know, the only people that can speak on behalf of tribes are tribal governments, and that's what they're elected to do, and that's where their responsibility lies, and not with any of the groups. But nonetheless, we're very, very concerned to make sure that tribes not only have that seat at the table, but we could be potentially impact for future endeavors. So at one point, when Yucca Mountain was being examined in Nevada, tribes would have been impacted by that. But one of the related process as well as transportation. So when things are coming across the country, it's going to be going through tribal lands or adjacent to or nearby, and they may not even be right by the reservations, but they may be going through some traditional homelands where tribes were removed, and so tribes' interest and jurisdiction isn't just limited to where the reservation boundaries are, but sometimes it can extend states away. People that came from the East Coast and were moved out west of the Mississippi, or you get tribes that have relationships with other tribes, throughout the United States. And so we have to make sure that those kinds of conversations are brokered and they're also understood by the federal government, and making sure that the tribes are brought in early into a process and not just checking the box, but to really do something where you have meaningful conversations and communication with the tribes about anything that's being proposed that could be of interest to them or impact any of the resources that they need. I think it's important to note that every tribe is unique. So there's 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. They all have their own tribal governments. They make their own decisions. They do what they need to do. As we've said many times, that the states don't speak for the tribes, and the tribes don't speak for the states. But the tribes are the ones that can have input and determine what's in their best interest within their jurisdictional boundaries. However, it doesn't necessarily limit there. They can also weigh into conversations because they are within the state boundaries. So they have the opportunity and ability to not only converse, but many times there's good relationships between states and tribes, and other locations they may be a little bit adversarial or challenged. And so it really depends on what has been brokered and what kind of decisions have been made to make sure that tribes are involved in the process. One of the things that happens, I think, also is that many of the tribes have developed some good working relationships. Sometimes they may be at odds. Sometimes they tribal views may be a little bit deeper on some of the things where people aren't really concerned. It's more about it's not just limited to the money, but oftentimes it's cultural values and things that we have too. So it's like, those things are not for sale. And so tribes will always tell you, we're not going away. And I think that's another important element to understand, is when activities happen in a location, people can, if people on the outside, for example, non-tribal people, if they don't like something, they can move away. They'll go to another location, and they'll find wherever they want to be, and they won't have to be exposed or subjected to any kind of activities. And exposed, I don't mean that as exposure to any kind of elements, but really being a party to or being involved with. So I think, but the other thing, tribes cannot pick up and move away. They're stuck wherever they are. And so oftentimes you'll hear the term of environmental justice and things going by tribes or disadvantaged communities. And so tribes should be able to take part of environmental justice under Executive Order 12898. However, that sometimes isn't the case, because there's a calculus in which you have to be eligible to be considered disadvantaged. But the trust responsibility between the federal government and the tribes, that never goes away. That has to be there. So that's why environmental justice is an element to be included into the negotiations, but not necessarily the end all. And so we just need to make sure there's opportunities and methods for tribal people to come together to share something, what they feel is in their best interest, to make sure that those are being considered in the final outcome.
That's our Gone Fishing episode for today. We'll have more on this topic in the weeks and months ahead. This has been a front burner issue for many years in the nuclear industry, and doubtless will continue to be for years to come. If your community would like to learn more about the benefits of hosting a spent fuel storage facility, contact the Energy Community Alliance at energyca.org or the Department of Energy at energy.gov/consent-based siting. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Funding for the Gone Fishing Nuclear Report is provided by the Energy Communities Alliance.